She vanished and took his entire empire with her. Now the Mafia boss who threw her away is on his knees begging. Jill Lawrence spent 7 years building Mauro Conti from a violent street thug into a criminal king. She laundered his blood money, negotiated his deals, turned his rage into strategy. She loved him in silence while he never looked her way. She was invisible, the brilliant ghost behind his throne. Then he betrayed her. At Manhattan's Carlyle Hotel, Mauro slipped a diamond ring onto supermodel Jasmine Tate's finger. The crowd applauded his strategic marriage, a union bringing legitimacy and power. And Jill realized with devastating clarity, she'd built his kingdom, but she'd never wear his crown. So she disappeared into the October night, taking something Mauro didn't know she had: a leather ledger containing every crime, every account, every secret that could destroy him, plus encrypted cloud backups with a dead man's switch. If she's killed, arrested, or fails to enter a monthly security code, everything goes public automatically. 3 months later, his empire is ashes. The FBI is closing in. Rival mafia families are circling for the kill. And Mauro Conti, the man who once controlled half of New York, is losing his mind, searching for the woman he threw away. Because without Jill, the king has no kingdom. Now she's coming back to New York, not for revenge, but for justice. To destroy the Tates who tried to kill her, and finally make the man who overlooked her see what he lost. This is the story of the invisible woman who held all the power. Before we continue with Jill's story, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever loved someone who couldn't see your worth, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we tell stories about people who refuse to stay in the shadows. The Carlyle Hotel glittered like a promise wrapped in lies. Jill Lawrence stood near the bar, her dark blazer helping her blend into the shadows, a skill she'd perfected over 7 years. She watched Mauro Conti work the room. Tall, broad-shouldered with dark Italian features and salt and pepper hair, he looked devastating in his Tom Ford tuxedo. He laughed with Manhattan's elite, as if he'd been born to it, instead of clawing his way up from Brooklyn's bloodiest streets. She'd made him belong here. 7 years ago, she'd been a forensic accountant who discovered his money laundering schemes. He'd given her a choice: work for him or disappear. She'd chosen survival, but somewhere between restructuring his finances and teaching him which wine to order, she'd fallen in love with the broken man beneath the monster. 3 years ago, the Castellanos ambushed them in Queens. Mauro took a bullet. They were surrounded, outnumbered. Jill talked them out using nothing but intelligence, negotiating safe passage with men who didn't negotiate. She'd saved their lives while Mauro bled into her hands. The next morning, he'd thanked Marco for handling the situation, without mentioning her name. Psychologists call it the invisible labor paradox. When someone's contribution is so seamless, it becomes overlooked. Ladies and gentlemen, Mauro's voice rang through the ballroom. I have an announcement. Jasmine Tate appeared beside him, in a red Valentino gown, blonde and flawless. But Jill caught the details. Trembling hands, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way she flinched when her father, billionaire Richard Tate, silver-haired and shark-eyed, gripped her shoulder. I'm honored to announce my engagement to Jasmine Tate. The ring sparkled, the crowd erupted, cameras flashed, and Jill turned and walked away. Nobody noticed. By dawn, Jill had disappeared, taking $15 million from secret accounts, a leather ledger, and encrypted files that could destroy them all. She'd locked Mauro out of his empire but hadn't stolen from him. She'd only taken what was rightfully hers. 3 weeks after Jill disappeared, Mauro Conti realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Boss, the Cayman accounts are locked. Marco Devereaux, his scarred, loyal second-in-command, reported with barely concealed alarm. The encrypted files are gone. And there's a message. Mauro's jaw tightened. What message? From Jill. She has cloud backups of everything, protected by a dead man's switch. If she's killed, arrested, or doesn't enter a security code every 30 days, everything gets sent automatically to the FBI and major news outlets. The floor tilted beneath Mauro's feet. Find her, he said quietly. Dangerously. We've tried. She's a ghost. Marco hesitated. Boss, remember 3 years ago when the Castellanos ambushed us? You took a bullet. We were surrounded. Jill talked us out. She saved all our lives. Mauro remembered. He'd been too focused on his wounded pride to properly thank her. That's why I'm loyal to her, Marco said quietly. So I'm telling you straight, we won't find her unless she wants to be found. The following weeks were a nightmare. Without Jill's financial genius, Mauro's operations hemorrhaged money. Federal auditors noticed irregularities. His expensive accountants couldn't replicate her systems. Worse, his fiancée was useless. "Why are you so obsessed with your old assistant?" Jasmine asked from the sofa, scrolling through Instagram. Her voice held anxiety rather than dismissiveness, and her eyes darted to the door as if expecting someone. "She wasn't an assistant," Morrow snapped. "She was the architect of everything." Jasmine's fingers trembled on her phone. "Morrow, I need to tell you." She started typing something, but her phone buzzed first. All color drained from her face as she read the message. The human brain has a negativity bias. We focus more on losses than gains. For Morrow, losing Jill felt like losing a limb. That night, FBI agent Morrison arrived to question Morrow. "We're building a case, Mr. Conti, and we're very interested in talking to Jill Lawrence." "Where is she?" 6 weeks after Jill disappeared, Morrow Conti was unraveling. His empire was collapsing. The Castellano family had ambushed 2 warehouses. The Russos were pushing into Queens. His capos whispered that the boss had lost his edge, searching for a woman who clearly didn't want to be found. Marco found him in Jill's old office at 3 a.m., surrounded by her files, her handwritten notes. "You need to sleep, boss." "I can't." Morrow's voice was raw. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her face when I put that ring on Jasmine. She looked destroyed." "Why didn't you stop me?" Morrow's fist slammed into the wall. "I tried. You said I was being sentimental." Marco's tone held no judgment. "You wanted legitimacy more than you wanted her." The words cut deep. Morrow thought of his father Salvatore Conti, a brutal enforcer who'd beaten weakness out of his son from age 6. "Love makes you weak," his father had snarled. "Men like us don't marry for love. We marry for power. You marry some nobody secretary, you'll be laughed out of every room." His father's voice had echoed when advisors pushed the Tate marriage. And Morrow, coward that he was, had listened to ghosts instead of his heart. "I'm calling a press conference," Morrow announced. The press conference made national news. Morrow looked gaunt, unshaven, desperate. $5 million for information leading to Jill Lawrence. Not for prosecution, for protection. He looked directly into the cameras. "Jill, if you're watching this, please, just let me know you're alive." Across the country in Portland, Jill watched the broadcast on a burner phone. And for the first time in 6 weeks, she cried. But she didn't reach out. 3 days later, she received an anonymous text. "He's not the only one looking for you. Mercenary hired by the Tates. Victor Reeves, former Delta Force. Get out now. M. Portland, Oregon." Jill Lawrence, now going by Julia Cross, rented a modest apartment where nobody asked questions. She'd used her own money, $15 million, from secret offshore accounts she'd built as insurance, separate from Morrow's empire. She could disappear forever, but freedom felt like a prison when you'd spent 7 years loving someone who couldn't see you. She volunteered at a women's shelter, using her financial skills to help abuse survivors disappear exactly what she'd done for herself. "You're running from someone," Maya, a sharp counselor in her 40s, observed over cold coffee. "Rich? Dangerous? Both?" Jill's silence was answer enough. "You loved someone who treated you like furniture. Useful but never cherished." Maya leaned forward. "Psychologists call it invisible labor. You made yourself indispensable by making everything look effortless." The words hit like a physical blow. "And here's the harder truth," Maya said gently. "You were complicit in your own invisibility. Every time you accepted being overlooked, you taught him that's how to treat you." Jill's hands trembled. She thought of Morrow's press conference, the desperation in his eyes. Part of her wanted to run back. "So what do I do?" Jill whispered. "You decide if love is enough, or if you need respect too." That night, Jill wrestled with contradictory truths. She still loved Morrow. Watching him broken had cracked something inside her. But she also knew she couldn't go back to being invisible. She'd been training in Krav Maga for 5 years, with a former Israeli Special Forces instructor. She carried a concealed weapon, had multiple exit strategies. When Marco's warning arrived about Victor Reeves, she wasn't surprised. She was prepared. 2 days later, a cold-eyed man in a black rental car followed Jill to the women's shelter, his hand resting on a concealed weapon. Victor Reeves was the best in the business, former Delta Force, 6'1" with ice blue eyes and predatory stillness. 23 high-value eliminations with 0 failures. Richard Tate had paid him $500,000 to eliminate Jill Lawrence. He'd tracked her through financial forensics, following faint digital breadcrumbs. Now he watched her leave the women's shelter, carrying groceries toward the parking garage. She looked ordinary, Soft. An easy mark. Victor's first mistake was assuming Jill was defenseless. His second was underestimating how long she'd been preparing for this moment. He approached as she loaded groceries. "Miss Lawrence, we need to talk." Jill went completely still. Her heart rate spiked, the ancient fight-or-flight response flooding her with adrenaline. But 5 years of training had taught her that fear doesn't mean freezing. Sometimes fear is rocket fuel. She turned slowly, and Victor saw something in her eyes that triggered his combat instincts. This was a woman who'd been waiting for war. "Who sent you?" she asked with unnatural calm. "Richard Tate or the Castellanos? Does it matter?" "It does when I need to know who to destroy after I survive this." Victor moved fast, but Jill moved faster. She deliberately positioned her car at an angle, trunk open as both weapon and shield. When Victor lunged, she slammed the trunk lid into his face with devastating force, then drove her knee into his solar plexus. He staggered, shocked. She pressed her advantage, throat strike, knee strike, grabbed the tire iron and swung it into his ribs. The crack of bone echoed through the garage. Victor collapsed, gasping, 2 ribs severely cracked. Jill stood over him, breathing hard, tire iron steady. "Tell Richard Tate that Jill Lawrence isn't hiding anymore. Tell him if he sends anyone else, the dead man's switch activates and everyone burns." She left Victor there as a message wounded but alive. On the flight to New York 2 days later, Jill received an encrypted message. "FBI wants to meet. Can guarantee your safety. Interested? Morrison." FBI agent Thomas Morrison weathered, gray at the temples, tired eyes from 20 years chasing organized crime, had been sent an encrypted message with evidence that would crack open his biggest case. 2 days after Jill left Portland, they met in a secure hotel room. "Full immunity for myself and Mauro Conti," Jill said without preamble. "In exchange, I give you the Castellano family, the Russo family, Richard Tate's entire operation, and evidence of political corruption spanning 3 states. Morrison leaned back. "You're asking me to let a mafia boss walk. I'm asking you to catch 9 bigger fish using Mauro as bait." Jill slid an encrypted drive across the table. "Richard Tate has been hiding behind legitimacy for decades. He's planning to eliminate Mauro and consolidate New York's underworld under his control." Morrison plugged in the drive. His expression darkened with each file. Financial records, recorded conversations, wire transfers, evidence of domestic abuse, medical records suggesting Jasmine's mother's accidental death 5 years ago might have been murder. "The difference between white-collar criminals and organized crime," Morrison said quietly. "White-collar criminals steal billions and get country club prison. Street criminals steal thousands and get decades. Richard Tate has been hiding behind legitimacy while funding violence. He's worse than everyone you're asking me to arrest." "That's why I'm here," Jill said. "What does Conti get?" "A chance to go legitimate. He cooperates fully, testifies, keeps whatever businesses we can prove are clean. The rest gets seized." Morrison studied her. "You still love him?" Jill's mask cracked slightly. "I'm trying to figure out if love is enough without respect. Can you deliver him?" "Yes," though her heart twisted. "One more thing, I'm keeping the dead man's switch active until Richard Tate is convicted and denied bail. Extra insurance." Morrison nodded. "Smart. And Victor Reeves is back in New York. Cracked ribs won't stop him." That night, Jill sent Marco an encrypted message. "I'm coming home. Tell Mauro we need to talk. Our old office. Midnight." Nearly 3 months after Jill disappeared, Mauro stood in her old office. Marco waited outside close enough for security, far enough for privacy. When the door opened at midnight, Mauro's breath caught. Jill stood transformed, stronger, harder, her dark eyes no longer soft with hidden affection. She wore black jeans and a leather jacket, moved like a woman forged in steel. "Jill," he breathed. "Don't," she said sharply. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because we both have enemies, and I have a plan to survive them." But Mauro couldn't hear strategy. He saw only the woman he'd loved and betrayed. He remembered 4 years ago she'd fallen asleep at her desk after a marathon negotiation. He'd carried her to the couch, covered her with his jacket, and watched her sleep for an hour, terrified by how much he needed her, terrified of what his father would say about loving someone beneath his station. Research shows we don't appreciate things until they're gone. It's called loss aversion. For Mauro, it was waking up every morning for 3 months with a hole in his chest. The guilt crashed over him. He dropped to his knees. "Mauro, what are you?" "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I was a coward." I chose my dead father's voice over my own heart. I chose strategy over the only person who actually mattered. Jill stood frozen, shocked. She'd prepared for many scenarios, but not this. Not the most dangerous man in New York on his knees, tears streaming without shame. For 7 years, you built everything I have. Morrow continued. You turned a thug into a king, and I never told you that you were extraordinary, that I loved you, that every success was more yours than mine. Stop. I can't. Morrow looked up with devastated eyes. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for the chance to earn it. Her phone buzzed urgently. Morrison. Tate knows you're in the city. Meeting moved up tomorrow night. Pierre Hotel. It's a trap. Jill pulled away from Morrow's confession. We don't have time for this. Read. Morrow read Morrison's warning, his devastation hardening to deadly focus. The wedding planning meeting. Jasmine texted about it this afternoon. It's a trap, Jill said flatly. She pulled up a video on her laptop. I hacked Richard Tate's home security 3 weeks ago. Watch. The footage showed Richard and Jasmine in his study, 1 week before the engagement. You'll marry Conti. Richard's voice was cold, threatening. You'll play the devoted fiancé, and when I give the signal, you'll make sure he's alone and vulnerable. Daddy, please, I don't want to. The slap echoed through the speakers. Jasmine's gasp of pain made Morrow flinch. You don't get to want, Richard snarled. You'll do what you're told, or I'll do to you what I did to your mother. Jasmine's voice, broken. Does he have to die? He's a criminal, sweetheart. The world will be better without him, and you'll be a wealthy widow under my control, just like your mother would have been if she'd stayed obedient. Jill paused the video. Jasmine isn't the villain. She's a victim. Her father has been controlling her through violence and psychological manipulation for years. Classic, coercive control, a pattern of behavior that isolates someone through intimidation and threats. The FBI is also investigating whether he murdered Jasmine's mother. Morrow sat heavily. Her texts asking to meet, she was trying to warn me. She's leaving breadcrumbs, Jill confirmed. She's terrified but doesn't want you dead. Marco entered. So what's the play? We go in tomorrow, Jill said. But first, we meet with Morrison today to get wired and coordinate with FBI surveillance. The next day, Morrison briefed them as technicians attached equipment. Richard Tate is dangerous. Victor Reeves will likely be there. Cracked ribs won't stop a professional. Be ready for anything. Morrow looked at Jill. Together? Her expression softened slightly. Let's survive tomorrow first. That evening, Richard held a gun to Jasmine's back. Text him. Make it convincing. With shaking hands, Jasmine typed, Please come tonight. My father knows I tried to warn you. He's threatening me. I need help. Nearly a week after the Portland attack, the Pierre Hotel's presidential suite glittered with false elegance. Morrow arrived with Marco, both wired and armed. Jill monitored from an FBI van 3 blocks away, heart pounding. Jasmine stood near the window, terrified, a fresh bruise on her cheek barely covered by makeup. Richard Tate, silver-haired, cold-eyed, radiating menace, stood behind her. Victor Reeves positioned himself by the door, moving stiffly with taped ribs, murder in his eyes. Morrow, Richard said smoothly. So glad you could make it. Where's the wedding planner? Morrow asked, hand near his weapon. Richard's smile was venomous. Let's dispense with pretense. You're bleeding money, losing territory, facing federal investigations. Sign over your assets and disappear. Or die here. Actually, Morrow said, there's a third option. The doors burst open. FBI agents flooded in. FBI, nobody move. Morrison entered with grim satisfaction. Richard Tate, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, domestic violence, and we're reopening the investigation into your wife's death. Richard's composure shattered. You can't prove. Actually, we can, Jill said, stepping into the suite. 7 years of financial records, recorded conversations, security footage of you abusing your daughter, wire transfers linking you to 3 crime families, medical examiner's notes about your wife, and testimony from Mauro Conti and your daughter, both cooperating fully. Victor Reeves made his desperate move. Despite cracked ribs, he pulled a concealed knife and lunged at Jill with lethal speed. But Mauro was faster. He threw himself between them. The blade sank into his shoulder instead of Jill's throat. Mauro gasped but grabbed Victor's wrist, twisting until bones cracked. FBI agents swarmed in, subduing Victor. Mauro! Jill caught him as he staggered, blood spreading across his shirt. Couldn't let him hurt you, Morrow managed, face pale. Not again. Never again. Jasmine watched her father being handcuffed, tears streaming. Thank you, she whispered to Jill. You saved my life. Paramedics rushed in as Morrow's consciousness wavered. Don't leave, he whispered. Please stay. 5 days after the Pierre Hotel, Morrow woke to fluorescent hush and the steady beep of machines. Jill was asleep in the chair beside his bed jacket, still on, hair slightly undone. Her hand locked around his like she'd decided the world didn't get to pry her loose anymore. He swallowed through the pain. Jill, her eyes snapped open instantly. Not soft. Not afraid. Just there. Present in a way she'd never allowed herself to be before. You're awake, she said, voice steady. Morrow tried to smile and winced. I got stabbed, saving the love of my life. Jill's composure cracked, tears spilled, furious and relieved. You idiot. You could have died. I didn't, he whispered, and neither did you. Outside that room, the world was changing fast. Richard Tate was indicted on a stack of federal charges: money laundering, racketeering, domestic violence, conspiracy to commit murder, and the reopened investigation into his wife's death hit the news like a bomb. Bail denied. No escape hatch. No smiling press tour. Just steel bars and court dates. Jasmine disappeared from the cameras and into trauma therapy. 2 months later, a letter arrived for Jill, handwritten, trembling but honest. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else saw a trophy. I'm testifying next week. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. The other families fell next. Raids, seizures, arrests. The empire Mauro once ruled was stripped down to what could be proven clean, and that's where Jill made her final move. She didn't return as his shadow. She returned with her name on paper. Co-CEO, partner, equal. Mauro didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He backed it with actions that cost him pride and power. Therapy twice a week. Full financial transparency. Introductions that made it clear. Disrespect Jill. You lose access to him permanently. 3 months after the takedown, Jill walked into their office and stopped. The wall between their rooms was gone. 2 equal desks faced each other. No throne, no corner office, no assistant's seat. No more separate spaces, Mauro said quietly. I spent too long pretending I didn't need you. I won't do that again. Jill studied him the way she used to study spreadsheets, looking for hidden costs, traps, fine print. Good, she said. Because I'm not shrinking anymore. 6 months later, Mauro didn't propose like a king. He proposed like a man who finally understood what he'd almost lost. He knelt, not desperate, not pleading, just reverent. He held out a simple gold band. I'm not asking you to be my queen, he said. I'm asking if you'll let me spend my life being worthy of your partnership, your equality. Jill took the ring and held it for a moment. Then she slid it onto her own finger, not accepting it, but claiming it. Yes, she said, but understand this. I'm saying yes to us, and yes to myself. The moment I become invisible again, I walk. Mauro's eyes shone. You're extraordinary. I know, Jill said, simple, unshakable. 3 months later, their wedding was private. No cameras, no politics, just truth. Before the ceremony, Morrison pulled Jill aside. Tate was convicted yesterday. Life without parole. You can turn it off. Jill entered the monthly code one last time. Dead man's switch. Deactivated. For the first time in nearly a year, she breathed like a free woman. As she walked into the light with Mauro beside her, not ahead, not behind, Jill realized the real empire she'd built wasn't his. It was herself. And this time, the whole world could see her. Jill's story teaches us something powerful. You can't demand respect from others until you give it to yourself first. For 7 years, she accepted invisibility, and it took walking away to finally be seen. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. I share stories 5 times a week about people who refused to stay invisible, who chose themselves, and who learned that sometimes walking away is the only way to truly arrive. And here's my question for you. Have you ever been the invisible one in a relationship? What did you do about it? Tell us in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to choose themselves.